The West ended the way it had always begun, with dust and debt, with the horizon promising something new and delivering only the same old hunger in different clothes. Elias Mercer had built his living on recording what everyone else was too busy surviving to notice. Inside his photography studio, the light fell in clean rectangles across wood counters and glass plates. He loved the quiet math of it, how faces could be fixed for a moment, how grief could be bottled into silver and kept from blowing away. He called it mercy. Others called it profiteering. But Elias needed the money. His lease was up in 3 months, and the town council had begun to whisper about making space for a railroad depot that might never arrive on time. He was supposed to move his equipment to the new station site. He was supposed to photograph the men who were already claiming land they hadn't paid for. He was also supposed to do what he'd been hired for by the man with the purse strings and the reputation: carry equipment and hire his own wagon for a day trip to a nearby settlement. There, wealthy families wanted portraits before the world changes too much. Elias had agreed because the payment would buy time. The stagecoach was built for passengers and arguments. It rattled over ruts that looked like old wounds. Elias sat with his camera case and tripod stowed beside him, his fingers always moving as if he could keep shaking the future loose by grip alone. The driver flicked the reins and laughed at how thin the sky looked that morning. Then the wind shifted. It brought with it the smell of wet horse and something sharper, blood, or the memory of it. Elias leaned forward, scanning the road where sage gave way to brittle scrub. He had learned to watch. Men who lied moved their eyes first. Men who were about to do something dangerous never looked straight at danger until the last possible second. He saw her before he saw what had happened. A woman lay half off the road, her body angled as if the world had tilted and refused to catch her. Her dress was stained dark at the hem. A beaded sash lay twisted under her ribs. One arm was tucked awkwardly beneath her, as if she'd tried to shield something inside herself. Elias recognized the shape of her people's presence even without knowing her story. Apache women didn't just appear in white country like stray weather. Their names carried, their villages carried, their survival carried. He swallowed hard. The driver didn't slow at first. The stagecoach kept going, the wheels crunching grit, as if speed could erase the evidence of need. Elias rose, pushing through the jostling air. "Stop!" he said. The driver barked a laugh. "We stop for passengers, not for people," Elias cut in. His voice surprised him. It came out rougher than he meant. "Stop the wagon." The driver pulled the reins hard enough that the horses snorted. Hooves dug into the shoulder. The stagecoach shuddered to a halt. Elias climbed down, his boots sinking into dust that had the stale chill of yesterday's rain. He hurried to the woman. As he drew close, he saw her eyes open, dark, copper brown, shining with a kind of stubborn awareness. She wasn't dead. That was the first mercy Elias could claim. He crouched beside her. "Can you hear me?" She spoke, but her words came like stones rolling down a slope, slow, deliberate, and not shaped for his tongue. She lifted her gaze past him, toward the road behind where the stagecoach had come from. Elias followed her stare. In the distance, a line of riders approached. Not a friendly line, not a line that passed through with trade goods and polite nods. This was pursuit. Before Elias could decide whether to stand and run or to help and be punished, the woman's breath hitched. Her hand grabbed at the air, searching for something to hold. When her fingers found Elias's coat sleeve, her grip was unexpectedly strong. "Please," she tried to say in English, the word breaking on the edges of her mouth. "No!" Elias couldn't tell if she meant don't help her or don't let them find her. Her fear was so immediate it swallowed clarity. The stagecoach driver had come down too, rolling his eyes as if Elias had ruined the schedule. "She's trouble," he muttered. "Deputy's gonna have a fit." Elias looked back toward town on the ridgeline, remembering how rumors traveled faster than wagons. He knew enough to understand what the word deputy could do. The riders got closer. Elias reached for the woman's shawl, preparing to lift her carefully. Her body felt light, like she'd been bleeding longer than the day had lasted. He winced at the way her shoulder shifted wrong. As he touched her, she flinched, not from pain alone, but from a sudden certainty that men might be watching. Elias pulled his hand back. He swallowed. "I won't leave you." Her eyes searched his face. In them, Elias saw something he hadn't expected. Not gratitude yet, but assessment. Like she was determining whether he was the kind of man who would lie for comfort or the kind who could stay true under threat. The stage driver spat. "You can't carry her, she'll slow us." Elias straightened. "Then she can ride." He climbed back onto the coach and shouted for the driver to make room. The driver argued, muttering about legal trouble and "those people" that he treated like a single word instead of a nation of living souls. Elias didn't argue back. He moved with the quiet focus he used in his darkroom, hands steady even when his heart hammered. When he returned, he saw her shifting, trying to sit up. Her body resisted. She tried anyway. He realized she was trying to keep him from deciding alone. He knelt again and wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, tucking it close. "Easy," he said. "You need rest." Her lips trembled. "They followed." "Who?" Elias asked. She glanced again at the approaching riders. "Wren." That name landed like a hammer. Elias knew Calder Wren. Everyone did. He wasn't a deputy so much as a moving threat dressed in law. The town praised him for keeping order, the way people praised fire for being hot. The stage driver had gone pale. "Calder Wren's coming?" Elias didn't answer directly. He didn't trust his mouth. He only asked, "What's your name?" For a moment, her gaze softened, as if she didn't expect anyone to ask. Then she answered, the words scraping but real. "Say Blackhawk." Elias repeated it silently, learning the rhythm. A name deserved to be kept. Behind them, the riders dismounted with a crunch of boots and a jingle of leather. Elias could count the men without needing to see their faces clearly. He recognized the posture of men who were sure they were right. At the head rode Calder Wren himself. Wren's eyes found Elias and then dropped to the woman. His expression didn't change much, but something cold rearranged inside him. "You got yourself a passenger," Wren said. Elias stood slowly, one hand still near the tripod case strap, as if he might use a camera like a weapon if needed. "She's injured." Wren's gaze flicked again to Tseyi. "Injured people don't wander roads. Not Apache women." Tseyi's jaw tightened. She tried to pull herself up, and Elias had to steady her. Wren smiled without warmth. "That's what I was told. There's a reason she's on the road." Elias could feel the air shifting, like the moment before a gunshot when everyone knew the sound would be costly. "I'm taking her to the nearest settlement for care," Elias lied, because it was the fastest way to buy time. Wren's eyes narrowed. "Nearest settlement is mine. You're trespassing on my jurisdiction, Elias Mercer." Elias hated how Wren said his name, like it was already written in a ledger. "Then arrest her," Elias said, forcing steel into his voice. "Not me." Wren leaned forward a fraction. "You think this is about law? It's about what's coming." He gestured with two fingers, and one of the men stepped nearer. The way that man moved told Elias he wasn't going to ask twice. Seyi's fingers dug into Elias's sleeve. Her eyes didn't beg, they demanded. They were saying, "If you help me, you will become a target. If you let them take me, you will live with the weight forever." Elias made his choice. He lifted his chin. "She goes nowhere until she's able to walk." Wren's smile widened. "You don't get to decide." Elias looked at the men behind Wren, at the way their hands rested near their holsters. He thought about his darkroom, thought about glass plates shivering under pressure, thought about the last time he'd been called coward and laughed off. He could still choose to keep his head down, or he could choose to be the man who turned back. Before Wren could speak again, Elias reached into the stagecoach and pulled out a folded blanket. He wrapped it around Seyi like a protective wall and lifted her carefully, ignoring the protest in her breath. Her weight was almost nothing, but the effort felt like lifting a piece of the world Elias was trying to keep from breaking. Ren's hand snapped out. "Put her down." Elias didn't. The blanket hid her injuries well enough to keep the men from seeing how far she'd already been broken. Elias carried her toward the stagecoach seat, keeping himself between her and the men. "Driver," Elias said, "move." The driver hesitated, eyes darting between Ren's authority and Elias's insistence. Elias's gaze pinned him. "Move!" The horses lurched forward. Ren shouted an order, something about stopping the wagon, about retrieving property, about turning this into a lesson. The men behind them mounted and gave chase. Elias didn't look back. He focused on Seiyi's breath, on the way her eyes followed the road like she expected it to betray her again. Within minutes, the stagecoach reached a shallow bend where dry river stones framed a narrow path into scrub. Elias yanked the reins himself, guiding the wagon off the main road into a pocket of shelter. He set Seiyi down behind a tumble of rocks, out of sight of the road. Her hands shook as she tried to sit. Elias knelt beside her, hands hovering as if he feared he might hurt her with kindness. "Why are they hunting you?" he asked. She stared at the horizon, throat working. "Because I carry something." "Money?" Elias guessed. "No," she said, and the word held quiet certainty. "A truth." Elias's stomach tightened. "Whose truth?" Seiyi's lips parted. For a moment, she looked almost peaceful, like the question was too heavy and her body wanted rest more than answers. Then her eyes sharpened. "Not theirs." A faint tremor ran through her. Pain tightened her face. Elias pressed a hand to her shoulder gently and she flinched, but she didn't pull away. From behind, distant gunfire cracked. Not close enough to hit them, but close enough to remind them that violence was now a language. Elias tightened his jaw. "We have to move again." "I can't walk," Seiyi whispered. He searched his thoughts for a solution that wouldn't make everything worse. He could try to return to the settlement. Ren would be waiting. He could hide her in the scrub until the riders lost interest. But Ren's kind didn't lose interest. They simply changed tactics. Then Elias remembered what he'd always been, an observer who pretended he was neutral. He had a studio in town, a place with walls thick enough to muffle sound, a room where photographs could be made even while the world burned. The darkroom could hide her if he was willing to risk being implicated. He exhaled, a long breath that felt like turning a page. "We go to my studio," he said. Seiyi's eyes widened. "Your place?" "You trusted me enough to let me carry you," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Trust me again for one more stretch." She looked down at her hands, at the way her knuckles were bruised. Her fear softened into something else, something like respect, and something like calculation. "If they come," she said, "you will be marked." Elias nodded. "I already am if Ren's hunting you." Her mouth tightened as if she wanted to argue, but her strength ran out before the disagreement could take shape. He lifted her again, more carefully this time, slower so she wouldn't gasp. He guided the stagecoach driver to the narrow path, keeping the wagon quiet. They reached town near dusk. Elias's studio stood on a street that used to be a trading road and now functioned mostly as a warning. Posters hung in storefront windows, wanted notices, marriage announcements, the occasional advertisement for whiskey. The studio's windows were dusty, and the sign creaked whenever the wind passed through. Elias hurried inside, locking the door behind them. His dark room waited in shadow, smelling faintly of chemicals and old paper. The place was built for stillness. Right now, stillness felt like a weapon. He carried Seiyi to a cot in the back room where he stored spare props. The cot wasn't meant for bodies that mattered, but it could hold hers for a while. Elias went to his supplies: clean cloth, water, alcohol diluted with care. His hands moved like he'd rehearsed this, not knowing he had. When he returned, Seiyi had shifted herself to sit upright, her gaze fixed on the dark-room door. "You have plates," she said. "I do," Elias admitted. "Take one," she asked, her voice low, "before they make me disappear." Elias froze with a bandage in his hands. Disappear? She nodded once, slow. Ren believes he can decide what is seen. Elias's chest tightened. The thought of his own work being used as proof for someone's cruelty chilled him more than the gunfire outside. He looked at her face again, at the tired dignity she wore even as her body betrayed her. He understood suddenly what she meant by truth. If she was about to be hunted, then a photograph could become testimony, not the kind that saved anyone in court, the kind that survived when the story tried to bury someone. Elias swallowed and nodded. If you can bear it, I'll do it. Seiyi's eyes softened. You won't look away. I won't, he said. The first relief was temporary. Later that night, Elias heard hooves in the street. He didn't sleep. He sat by the front desk with the light turned low, his camera case open like a promise. The dark room's chemical smell mixed with the sweat of fear. At midnight, a knock struck the door, 3 hard raps like punctuation. Elias's heart kicked once, hard enough to make his ribs ache. He stood slowly and opened the door. Calder Wren stepped inside with 2 men. Their boots left dark prints on the boards. Wren's eyes moved immediately to Elias's desk, to the camera case, to the layout of the room like he was already deciding how to write the story. You should have sent her on, Wren said calmly. Elias felt rage flare, but he kept his posture steady. She's injured. Wren's gaze slid to Elias. So are many people. Only some of them get protection. Elias's voice went low. If you came for her, then you already decided she doesn't deserve help. Wren chuckled. Help is what fools call it. He turned his head slightly. Where is she? Elias didn't answer at first. He looked at Wren's men, at their hands resting near their belts. If he lied, he might survive the night. If he refused, he might be dragged out and used as an example. But Seiyi's eyes, even in the dim back room, were asking him to be more than a man who kept quiet. Elias swallowed. In back. Wren's expression brightened for a moment, then he frowned, as if he hadn't expected the truth to be offered so willingly. Good, Wren said. Bring her out. Elias stepped aside. Wren walked through the studio's main room and toward the dark room door. Elias followed at a distance that felt like distance from himself. Inside, Seiyi sat on the cot wrapped in cloth. Her breathing was tight. Her eyes lifted to meet Wren's. Wren stared at her for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Elias. You think you can hide her behind your little lenses? Elias's jaw clenched. She's a person, not a case. Wren stepped closer, careful not to show impatience. People don't get to choose their names in my town. Seiyi's face stayed still, but her eyes burned. My name is mine. Wren smiled like a man admiring a problem. Then you'll say it when you're dragged back. Dragged back. Elias felt cold spread along his spine. He understood suddenly. Seiyi wasn't only being hunted to silence her, she was being hunted to retrieve something Wren believed she carried. Elias looked at Seiyi and saw the truth in her posture. She wasn't only afraid, she was preparing. Why her? Elias asked, his voice rough. What did she do? Wren's eyes flicked toward Elias with annoyance. She tried to claim land that belongs to better men. Land doesn't belong to better men, Elias snapped. Land belongs to whoever can keep it without killing the weak. Wren's smile thinned. And you're what? The hero who plays at neutrality? Elias wanted to answer with something noble. He didn't have noble words. He had only the stubbornness of someone who'd watched too many people vanish. Seiyi shifted on the cot. Her hand found a pouch hidden under the blanket. Wren's men tensed. Elias's breath caught. Seiyi didn't draw it out to attack. She drew it out slowly, as if giving Wren a courtesy. Inside, she held a small leather packet. The way she cradled it told Elias it wasn't money. It was fragile. Wren's eyes narrowed. Give it to me. Seiyi's lips pressed together. Not to you. Wren moved faster now, reaching for her pouch. Elias stepped forward. He didn't have a gun, His weapon was his knowledge of light and angles, his understanding of how a moment could be made into evidence. He grabbed his camera, pivoted it so the men's faces were framed in the lens. Ren froze for half a breath, anger flashing. Elias spoke without thinking. "Take another step and I'll make your face the first truth on that plate." Ren snarled. "You think a photograph stops me?" "I think a photograph survives when men don't," Elias said. "And I think you're afraid of surviving." Ren's eyes flicked again to Tseyi, as if he could decide whose life mattered more. Tseyi's voice cut through the tension. "Elias Mercer, if you stand between us, you will pay." Elias didn't look away from Ren. "Then I'll pay. But you don't go without leaving a mark." For a heartbeat, Ren looked almost uncertain. He wasn't used to resistance he couldn't instantly label as foolish. Then he recovered. He reached into his coat and pulled a small pistol. Elias's stomach dropped. Even without a plan, his body knew this could turn lethal in seconds. Tseyi did something Elias didn't expect. She lunged, not at Ren, but at Elias's camera case. Her injured shoulder flared with pain as she grabbed a glass plate. Elias lunged too, but it was too slow. The plate slipped, clinked against leather, and fell. It shattered on the floor with a sharp, final sound. Ren's gun dipped just slightly, shocked. Elias stared at the broken glass, his chest aching as if someone had struck him in the ribs. Tseyi's eyes met his, and her expression was apologetic in a way that hurt more than anger. "I can't give you proof," she whispered. "Not yet." Ren's face hardened. He stepped forward, grabbing for the pouch again. Elias reacted on instinct, grabbing Ren's wrist and shoving him back. The studio became a battlefield of bodies and limited options. One of Ren's men shoved Elias against a shelf of chemicals. Bottles clattered. The smell of fixer and developer filled the air, sharp and stinging. Elias coughed, vision blurring. Tseyi struggled to stand, but the pain stole her strength. Ren pressed closer, breathing hard. "Now you see what you've bought yourself." Elias forced himself upright, eyes burning. He looked at Tseyi and saw she was still alive, still fighting. He realized the rescue hadn't ended. It had only changed shape. Outside, the distant gunfire quieted. Horses whinnied. Then a new sound arrived, rifles cocking farther out in town, followed by shouting. Ren turned his head, listening. Elias watched the shift, Ren's attention cracking, not fully leaving, but loosening. Tseyi used that fraction. She reached into the blanket again and pulled out something small, metal and folded fabric. A hidden object she'd kept close. She pressed it into Elias's hand. "When they come, run with this," she said. Elias stared. "What is it?" "A piece of paper," she whispered. "And a name." Ren's attention snapped back to her. "What did you do?" Tseyi's eyes went distant. "I made sure one truth survived you." Before Ren could lunge again, the front door burst open. A commotion surged through the street. Someone shouted Elias's name, someone not from Ren's men. Elias didn't recognize the voice, but he heard enough. There was an enemy inside the town's shadow, and it wasn't Tseyi alone. Ren swore and moved toward the front, pistol up. Elias grabbed Tseyi's arm and pulled her toward the back door, toward the alley that led behind the studio. His body shook with effort, but his mind was suddenly clear. Tseyi stumbled. Elias steadied her. "Go," she urged. "Not without you," Elias said. They slipped out into the alley's darkness. Elias guided her around stacked crates and past a shuttered storefront where old boards clung to nails. As they moved, Elias noticed something. On the edge of the studio lot, someone had arranged a wagon tarp in a way that looked like coincidence, until you noticed the rope ends tied neatly. A signal. Tseyi saw Elias's gaze. Her mouth tightened. "You were not the only one who turned back." He didn't understand until they reached the wagon. Inside, a horse waited with a leather pack. On top of it sat a folded cloth wrapped around a small camera tripod leg. Elias's throat tightened. "You knew my work." Tseyi's eyes shifted toward the distant shouts. "They hunt with stories. We fight with stories." Elias swallowed. "And what story is this?" Sei leaned close despite the pain and spoke words that sounded like a confession and a warning at once. The real enemy is the one who wears law like a coat. Elias felt his stomach twist. Ren was the law. But the shouts outside sounded like a different kind of claim. Someone else, using violence as a justification. They didn't have time to untangle it in full. Elias helped Sei climb onto the wagon, then took the reins himself. The horse strained forward. Behind them, the studio's door slammed once, hard enough to sound like a closing argument. As dawn washed the street with pale light, Elias guided the wagon away from town, away from the easiest path. He chose roads that looked wrong on purpose, hoping to confuse pursuit. Sei rode with her head against his shoulder. Her body felt like it was made of grief and stubborn will. Elias held her carefully, aware of every breath that might be her last if he didn't keep moving. Hours later, they reached the edge of the next settlement, smaller, poorer, quieter. A cluster of cabins and a rough church stood beside a creek. Elias pulled the wagon behind the church's side wall, where the stonework offered cover. He helped Sei down. "You'll take me to someone who can heal you?" she asked. "I'll find help," Elias promised. Sei looked down at her hands. "Help always comes with questions." "Then I'll answer," Elias said. He found a woman willing to offer bandages and boiled cloth. Her name was not important in this story so much as her eyes, sharp with the knowledge that compassion could still be a kind of danger. Elias left Sei with her and walked to find a doctor, or at least someone with enough skill to mend broken skin. When he returned, Sei was awake, staring into the distance as if she could see the road's future. He noticed the brokenness in her posture and tried to keep his face neutral. "I can still photograph you," Elias said softly. Sei's gaze shifted to him. "Why?" "Because you asked," he answered. "Because I can't stand the idea of them rewriting you." Her expression flickered. "You don't rewrite, you preserve." He stepped closer and opened his camera case. He had parts. Not all was lost. Even with a shattered plate, he could still make an image, if he could obtain a fresh glass plate and enough light. But that would take time, and time was what pursuit stole. Elias looked at Sei's face and decided to be honest. "I saved you," he said, voice low, "but I don't know if I can keep saving you." Sei's eyes softened with something like pity, and it hurt because it was earned. "You already know," she said. "You can't keep every person alive, but you can keep one truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather packet she'd given him. The paper inside was folded carefully, edges worn as if it had survived being opened too many times. He unfolded it in his lap. It wasn't a land title exactly. It was a confession, written in a shaky hand, describing how Calder Wren had falsified records to take land and how he planned to remove witnesses. It named men, times, and a hidden cache beyond the settlement. Elias's fingers trembled. "You were trying to stop him." Sei nodded. "He killed my people's chances to stay." Elias swallowed. "And your injury? The stagecoach." "It wasn't an accident," she said. "They used the wagon to get me alone." Anger rose in Elias's throat so fast it made him dizzy. He wanted to march back into town and burn Wren's story to ash. But he remembered something Wren had said. Help was what fools called it. If Elias rushed blindly, he would become the second victim. And Sei had asked for truth, not martyrdom. "What do we do?" Elias asked. Sei's eyes lifted. "We let the enemy kill the enemy." Elias blinked. "What do you mean?" She pointed toward the horizon. "Wren isn't alone anymore. Another man wants his job. Another man will come for the same proof." Elias stared. So the real enemy appeared after all. Sei's face tightened. "Yes, Wren's fear brought him help, and now that fear has drawn attention." Elias understood slowly. Sei wasn't only being hunted, she was bait. Her proof was the prize. The lawman's coat was only one part of the trap. If someone else wanted Wren's downfall, Elias could use that moment. But he needed allies who wouldn't turn violence into entertainment. Sei reached for Elias's hand. Her fingers were colder than they should have been. "Photograph me," she whispered again. "Not to show I'm brave, to show I'm real." Elias nodded. "I'll do it." They found a window with thin morning light and a flat surface. Elias fashioned a makeshift dark box using cloth and his camera. His hands shook less now because purpose had returned. He positioned Sei carefully. She flinched when he adjusted her shawl, but she didn't pull away. Elias set the plate into place. The act felt sacred and dangerous. He couldn't avoid the thought that each second they spent making an image was time they spent unprotected. Outside, a distant shout rose. Elias didn't turn his head. He focused on the lens's focus line, on the way Sei's eyes held steady. When the photograph was taken, Sei let out a breath that sounded like release. Then the settlement trembled with the arrival of riders. Elias recognized the pattern immediately. These weren't Wren's men. Their clothing was different, their horses leaner, their confidence sharper. They were someone else entirely. A man stepped forward with a grin that didn't match his eyes. "Deputy Wren's missing," he said loudly, like it was a compliment to himself. "I heard he had an Apache woman hiding." Elias's blood turned cold. Sei's eyes narrowed. "They came for me." Elias tightened his grip on the camera case. "Not while I can breathe." The man's grin faded, but he didn't hesitate. He gestured, and his riders began moving like wolves, circling prey. Elias had no gun. He had a camera, a plate, and a plan born from humility. He stepped forward, holding the evidence packet where they could see it, just enough to make them hungry. "You want Wren's proof?" Elias called out. The riders paused. Their leader's eyes gleamed. Elias swallowed his fear. "Then you'll want the photograph too. You'll want to know the Apache woman is real and that Wren's story can be verified." Sei's gaze held Elias's, fierce and steady. Elias continued, voice gaining strength. "But first you'll stand where I tell you to. One wrong move and I hand this to whoever survives long enough to read." The leader laughed. "You don't have authority." "I have something better," Elias said, and he realized how much he believed it. "I have witnesses that don't lie." He pointed toward the settlement church where a few townsfolk had gathered at the sound of shouting. Elias's heart hammered. He knew he was gambling, on people's curiosity, on their fear of scandal, on their desire to live in a world where proof mattered. The leader's riders hesitated, reading the shifting crowd. Sei spoke quietly from behind Elias. "Elias Mercer." Turned the lens toward his face. Elias looked at her, stunned by the calm. She wasn't begging for safety, she was manufacturing truth. He lifted the camera again quickly without waiting for the leader's permission. The lens captured the leader's grin, the shape of his cruelty. The settlement responded with startled murmurs. A man in the crowd lifted a hand, saying, "Hold on, show us!" Elias didn't waste time. He carried the glass plate toward the light, showing just enough of the image to make their eyes believe. The leader's confidence wavered. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. Elias held Sei's proof packet in plain view. "From the woman you came to steal." The crowd's attention shifted, fear changing into outrage. People didn't want to be the stage for someone else's law. They wanted distance from the violence. And when distance appeared, Elias felt something new. Not safety, but leverage. The leader spat and backed toward his riders. "This isn't your business." "It is," Elias said, "because you're already in it." Sei stepped forward, her injured body wrapped in shawl, her head held high. "Wren did this," she said, "and if you take my proof, you become the next villain in the story." The leader's eyes flashed. "Apache talk." Sei didn't flinch. "Real talk." Her copper-brown eyes met his. "The world is ending. Don't pretend you can write the ending alone." The leader's mouth tightened. He looked at his riders, then at the crowd, then at Elias's camera as if it had suddenly grown teeth. In the end, the riders didn't attack. They retreated, muttering about losses and revenge. But they left behind something more dangerous than blood, their doubt. And doubt was the one thing Calder Wren hadn't planned for. That night, someone brought Elias a message. One of the churchgoers had a cousin who knew men in the next town. The message promised an investigation, not the kind of clean court Elias wanted, not the kind that would return stolen land like it was a mislaid tool. But it was enough. Enough for Wren's name to start slipping in the direction of accountability. Enough for Tseyi's truth to start traveling past the walls of the studio. Elias returned to his studio the next week with Tseyi's photograph and proof packet secured in cloth and sealed in the camera's leather case. He expected Wren's men. He expected retaliation. Instead, he found a quiet street and a new set of rumors forming. Elias didn't get his dramatic confrontation in a saloon. The West rarely gave people the decency of one clean scene. But he did get something steadier. He found Tseyi waiting in his back room, pale but upright, her gaze calm as if she had decided to live no matter what. Elias set the camera case down carefully. "I did it," he said. Tseyi looked at him slowly. "You captured more than my face." Elias's throat tightened. "I captured yours and theirs. The truth that says you were here. The truth that says you weren't nothing." Tseyi's eyes flicked away for a moment, as if she was embarrassed by how deeply the words touched her. Then she looked back, fierce again. "Elias Mercer," she said, using his full name like a vow. "What do you want?" He hesitated. He had spent years pretending he only wanted money and time. Now he couldn't ignore what his chest wanted. "I want you safe," he said, and the honesty in it cost him. "And I want the kind of life where you don't have to be hunted to be real." Tseyi's mouth softened. "You helped me when others rode past." "I didn't do it to be praised," Elias said. "I did it because I couldn't stand being the man who watched." Tseyi's eyes glistened, and she blinked once quickly, refusing to let the feeling become weakness. "You were flawed," she said quietly. "So were you," Elias replied. Tseyi let out a breath that could have been laughter if the West hadn't been so heavy. "I plan to use your camera." Elias nodded. "I let you. I could have refused." He stepped closer, slow enough to give her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. In the silence, the studio's walls seemed to listen. Elias remembered all the faces he had photographed, faces that now felt like ghosts. He thought of how he'd been trying to preserve the dying West instead of fighting for someone inside it. Now he didn't want to preserve her like an artifact. He wanted to build. Elias took Tseyi's hand gently and held it. "I can't promise Wren won't find other ways to hurt you." Tseyi looked at their joined hands as if measuring risk and deciding it was still worth it. "I'm not afraid of him as much as I was," she said, "because I'm not alone anymore." Elias swallowed. "Then don't go alone." Tseyi lifted her gaze. "You want me to stay?" He nodded. "Stay where you can breathe. Stay where people can see you. Stay where your name doesn't have to be smuggled." Her eyes tightened with emotion, but she wasn't naive. "People will talk." "Let them," Elias said. His voice firmed. "The truth will talk louder." Tseyi leaned forward, slow and careful, and rested her forehead against his for a moment, an intimate touch that didn't ask for certainty beyond the next breath. When she pulled back, her lips were close to his ear. "Elias Mercer," she whispered. "You turned your lens into a shield." He closed his eyes, letting the compliment settle like warmth after a long, cold night. When he opened them again, he met her gaze and felt the final piece click into place. This wasn't a simple rescue. It was a choosing. They'd both made sacrifices. Elias had risked violence for truth. Tseyi had risked everything for proof. The real enemy had tried to force them into silence. Instead, they built a future out of hard evidence and harder tenderness. Elias moved first, lifting her hand and kissing her knuckles like a man learning reverence. Tseyi's breath caught. She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around his coat sleeve, grounding him. Outside, the town's rumors continued, but inside the studio, the light fell cleanly on the world Elias wanted to protect. He had documented the dying West. Now, with Sei Blackhawk beside him, he aimed his work at something rarer than endings. He aimed at beginnings. And when he took her photograph again weeks later, this time with no shattered glass, only steady hands and a calm sky, he didn't do it to sell grief. He did it to keep their promise visible.